Tonight, we travel back to a different world, a world of gaslight and shadows. We are exploring Victorian parenting. This was a time of strict rules and stranger remedies. Most of their methods would be illegal today. You would face child protective services for these practices. This journey is for you if you want to understand this peculiar past. If this strange corner of history is a place you enjoy, please subscribe to Medieval Nocturnes. Your support helps us create more calm explorations of the past. Leave a comment below telling us where you are listening from tonight. I find it fascinating to see how far these stories travel. I read every single one while I also struggle to find sleep. Now find your comfortable place. Let the room grow dark around you. The fan can provide a soft, soothing noise. Settle into your blankets and let go of the day. Victorian children were often bundled in many layers. They did this regardless of the heat. Their parents feared a sudden chill above all else. Let your mind wander to a few questions. Did parents really use opium to soothe a crying baby? What was the purpose of a child's corset? Was the phrase, "children should be seen and not heard," a simple suggestion? Or was it an unbreakable law with serious consequences? Why were so many household items covered in arsenic and lead? Imagine you have just woken up. The year is 1888 in the center of London. You are 7 years old. Your nanny checks on you with a stern expression. Your breakfast will be a bowl of bland, unseasoned gruel. You must eat it all without complaint. Welcome to your childhood. You are standing inside a proper Victorian nursery. The room is filled with rules and regulations. The air itself feels heavy with expectation. The wallpaper has faded floral patterns. It peels slightly near the damp window frame. Every surface holds a thin layer of dust. The air smells of coal smoke and boiled linen. The sun is a weak presence behind thick velvet curtains. You are barely awake, but you are already being watched. Your nanny observes your every small movement. You must sit straight and keep your hands folded. A toy is not for playing with joyfully. It is a tool for quiet and orderly learning. Laughter is a rare and suspicious sound here. The room is a carefully constructed stage for childhood. Your role is to be a quiet and obedient performer. A rocking horse with one eye sits in the corner. It seems to watch you with a silent judgment. Your day will be a long series of lessons and corrections. This is how character was built in the Victorian age. One silent and disciplined moment at a time. The general of this small world is your nanny. She is a woman made of starch and silence. Her authority is absolute. She can quiet a tantrum with a single raised eyebrow. Her keys jangle at her waist. They sound like a warning bell for any child considering mischief. She moves with a purpose that suggests fun is an enemy to be defeated. Let us discuss your toys. They are kept in a locked cabinet for their own protection, or perhaps to protect you from the dangerous idea of enjoyment. You own a single wooden soldier with a missing sword. You also have a doll with a cracked porcelain face. Its glass eyes seem to follow you with an ancient sadness. These are not friends. They are silent witnesses to your quiet childhood. Your play area is a small rectangle on the floor. It is defined by a faded and threadbare rug. Here you must play quietly. You must also play constructively. This means you can build a tower of blocks. You must not knock the tower down with a triumphant roar. That would be an excess of emotion. Such things are not permitted here. An adult might appear in the doorway at any moment. They will remind you that idle hands are the devil's workshop. So you learn to look busy at all times. You pretend to read a dull book. You practice your handwriting with intense focus. You do anything to avoid the accusation of idleness. Your childhood is a performance of constant industry. The nursery window offers a view of the garden below. You can see other children sometimes. They are marched in orderly lines by their own nannies. You wish you could join them in the fresh air. First, you must finish your lessons. You must recite poetry about morality and duty. Then you might be allowed to sit by the window. Sometimes you are permitted to watch the street from a window cage. This strange invention is for your health. You breathe the smoky London air. You dangle stories above the ground. Below you, the world is a chaotic and exciting place. Carriages rattle by and people shout. It is a world you can only observe from your safe metal perch. It is now time for breakfast. This means it is time for gruel. A pale and lumpy substance is placed before you. Your mother insists it is for your health. You believe it is designed to crush your spirit. The texture is like wet cardboard. The taste is a mixture of sadness and boiled oats. Sugar is a myth. Flavor is a distant dream. The breakfast table is a silent and serious place. Sunlight is forbidden from entering the room. Heavy curtains ensure a state of perpetual twilight. Your siblings sit in silence beside you. Each child is locked in a private struggle with their own bowl. No one speaks. Breakfast is for building fortitude, not for conversation. You take your first reluctant spoonful. It tastes of boiled water and disappointment. The gruel is often a strange gray color. It is sometimes lumpy. It is occasionally so thin it is like a sad soup. If you ask what is inside, the answer is always goodness. You learn that goodness is code for whatever was left in the kitchen pantry. Do not even think of asking for butter or jam. These things are symbols of a life you do not lead. Butter is for important guests. Jam is kept in a locked cupboard. It is given out only during times of serious illness. A spoonful of jam is a reward for surviving scarlet fever. It is not for enjoying on a normal Tuesday. On very special days there might be a treat, a birthday or a national holiday. The treat might be a single bruised apple. It is solemnly divided among 5 children. Otherwise, the only variety is the gruel's consistency. Some mornings it is solid enough to use as mortar. You must eat it all either way. There is no other choice available. Your parents lecture you on the moral benefits of a plain breakfast. It builds character, they say. It cleanses the body of ill humors. Never mind that your humors are mainly in need of some cinnamon. The adults read scary articles from the newspaper. They warn of the dangers of fancy foods, as if a warm croissant could lead a child to ruin. You sometimes see advertisements for breakfast powders. They promise robust health and vibrant energy. You beg your mother to buy a tin. She is not moved by your pleas. She reminds you that their family's secret to a long life is daily discomfort. You begin to suspect your ancestors lived so long out of pure stubbornness. After the ordeal of breakfast is over, you are sent to your lessons. You are not fortified with energy. You are fortified only by the knowledge that the day cannot get much worse. If you manage to sneak a dry crust of bread from the pantry, you are a king. Just do not let your nanny catch you. She will deliver a long lecture on the sin of gluttony. Victorian childhood is an exercise in mastering invisibility. The entire house seems to whisper the same warning. Children should be seen and not heard. Your primary job is to blend in with the heavy furniture. You must learn to walk without making the floorboards squeak. You pray that no adult asks you a direct question. This silent dance is a delicate art form. You move through the grand house like a small and nervous ghost. Every single step is carefully calculated. You must never run. You must never trip over the small footstool. If you feel a sneeze coming, you must smother it in your handkerchief. A sudden noise is a crime against the peace of the household. The drawing room is a land of silent dangers. You are allowed inside this formal space, but you must remain as still as a potted plant. You sit with your hands folded in your lap. Your eyes are politely looking at the floor. You try not to stare at the plate of biscuits on the sideboard. They are as forbidden as loud laughter. There is a correct way to hold your body. Your back must be perfectly straight. Your knees must be kept tightly together. Not a single toe should peek out from beneath your boots. If you fidget, your great-aunt will surely notice. Her disappointed sigh can ruin an entire afternoon. Silence is not enough. You must also be still. Dinner is the final and most difficult test of your day. The adults talk about serious matters. They discuss politics or the price of coal. You must eat your meal in complete silence. You must chew every bite thoroughly. You must not make any sound with your fork or your spoon. Being noticed is a catastrophic failure. If an adult speaks to you, your answer must be perfect. It must be short and respectful. It should be delivered in a clear, quiet voice. Yes, father. No, mother. I am very sorry, grandmamma. I will not speak of frogs at the table again. Your opinion is not required. Only your obedience is necessary for a peaceful meal. Being ignored by the adults is a great privilege. The fewer words they say to you, the safer you are. You become an expert at the neutral face. It is an expression that says, I am perfectly content. I am grateful for this boiled mutton. I am certainly not thinking about hiding under the table until this is over. You are a ghost at the feast. You learn to control your natural urges. You suppress the desire to laugh. You ignore the impulse to ask a curious question. You stifle the need to express any form of joy. Joy is an emotion reserved for rare occasions. The Queen's birthday is one such occasion. The successful blooming of a garden rose might be another. There are, of course, a few exceptions to the rule of silence. An adult may wish to show off your memory skills. You will be asked to recite a long moral poem, or you might list the kings of England in order. This is not an honor, it is a test. One mistake means you will be sent back to the nursery. There you will face extra handwriting drills. Punishment for breaking the code of silence is swift. It is also quite creative. There is the reflection chair in the hall. You must sit there and contemplate your noisy sins. There is solitary reading of books with titles like Why Silence is Virtue. And then there is the lecture, a long and boring speech on the importance of being quiet. Your nanny is the unquestioned ruler of the nursery. She is a firm woman in a starched black dress. She can stop a brewing tantrum with a single look. She is part drill sergeant and part watchful owl. Her medicine cabinet contains enough laudanum and soothing syrups to calm a small elephant. She is not afraid to use them. You are on her schedule. from the moment you wake. There are no lazy mornings when Nanny is in charge. She is awake before the sun. Her hair is in a tight bun. Her apron is so crisp it could slice bread. The first sound you hear is her determined walk across the floorboards. It is a sound that makes children and dust bunnies tremble. She does not need to raise her voice. Her stare is a powerful weapon. It can freeze milk at 20 paces. If you even sniffle in a way she finds annoying, she will fix you with her dark eyes. You will suddenly find yourself confessing to crimes you have not yet committed. Her silence is more intimidating than any shout could ever be. There is a strict schedule in the nursery. Nanny enforces it with military precision. Breakfast is at 7. Lessons are at 8. A brisk walk is at 9. This happens rain or shine or during a meteor shower. Every activity is designed to build your moral fiber. This fiber is apparently made from cold water and repetitive tasks. And then there is the infamous medicine chest. It is a Victorian Pandora's box. It is full of mysterious bottles and strange powders. The labels have names like soothing elixir or cordial of calm. If you have a toothache, you get a dose of laudanum. If you cannot sleep, you are given the soothing syrup. You quickly learn to pretend you are always in perfect health. The syrup for a cough is a dark and mysterious liquid. It tastes like despair and old leather shoes. The side effects include deep sleep. You might also have a brief and confusing vision of the afterlife. It is much easier to simply suffer through a cough. Anything is better than another spoonful of Nanny's strange medicine. Despite her stern nature, there are rare moments of softness. If you complete your lessons perfectly, she might read you a story. The story will be a cautionary tale. The hero is usually punished for having too much enthusiasm. Sometimes, if the house is calm, she will let you play with a special toy. This is a rare and treasured privilege. You must remember that Nanny knows everything. She sees all. She hears all. She remembers every single one of your misdeeds. Did you hide your boiled carrots under a cushion? She knows. Did you whisper a joke about her mustache? She absolutely knows. She will remind you of this failure when you least expect it. Her memory is long and unforgiving. It is time for your weekly bath. This happens once a week, whether you need it or not. You are brought to a large tin tub in the kitchen. Here you will be scrubbed with harsh carbolic soap. You will be reminded to feel grateful. After all, you are not being rinsed with vinegar like in the old days. Cold water builds character. So do the mysterious rashes that appear later. Bath night begins with a sense of grim ceremony. The house fills with the sound of boiling kettles. The air smells of coal smoke and damp wool. You are called to the kitchen. The tub waits like a metal threat. It radiates an aura of cold and steely resolve. Your siblings eye each other nervously. No one wants to be the last one in the murky water. Victorian efficiency means everyone shares the same bath water. This is a lesson in conservation. It is also an excuse for why you still smell like cabbage on a Thursday. If you are lucky, you go first. You get the cleanest and hottest water. If you are last, you are plunged into a family soup. It is cloudy and gray with floating mysteries. Your mother or nanny presides over the event. Her sleeves are rolled up. She holds the bar of carbolic soap. This soap is the pride of modern science. It feels like sandpaper dipped in disinfectant. It leaves your skin red and raw. It also leaves you feeling questionably clean. The goal is sanitation, not comfort. Hair washing is a separate and rare event. It is reserved for major holidays or an outbreak of lice. Otherwise, your scalp is brushed with great force. This is said to stimulate the roots. In practice, it just spreads the itch around evenly. Complaining is useless. You will only hear stories about Great Aunt Mildred, who bathed once a year and lived to be 90. You are told that this weekly bath is a luxury. Before modern soap, people used sand or nothing at all, so you should not grumble about the cold. Your ingratitude is noted in a mental ledger. The towels are thin and scratchy. They are always slightly damp. You are rubbed down briskly until you are pink and shivering. After the bath, there is a ritual inspection. Nanny checks you for new rashes or scratches. Any spot is treated with an ointment from the medicine chest. These strange salves smell of tar and regret. You are then bundled into a clean nightshirt. It is fresh by Victorian standards. This means it has only had 3 previous owners. Of course, this state of cleanliness does not last. By morning, you will have found a new mud puddle, or you will have a mysterious stain on your sleeve. But no one seems to worry. A thin layer of dirt is believed to protect you from illness. Anyone who bathes too often is regarded with deep suspicion. They are probably an eccentric. The playroom is a space of both paradise and peril. You might find a simple wooden top. You could get a hoop for rolling. Or you might get a doll with eyes that follow you around the room. Most toys are made of wood. They are breakable and entirely unsafe. They are designed to prepare you for life's many hardships, or more likely for a case of tetanus. Victorian playthings are marvels of dangerous craftsmanship. The jack-in-a-box is wound with a trembling hand. You know that what pops out will not be a cheerful clown. It will be the source of lifelong trust issues. The rocking horse sits in the corner with flaking paint. It dares you to ride it and risk a serious splinter. These toys build character. They may also cause minor injuries. Wooden blocks have a dual purpose. They are tools for building miniature castles. They are also excellent projectiles in a war against your sibling. Marbles are beautiful and shiny. They are also the #1 cause of chipped teeth in children under 10. Your dollhouse is an elaborate mansion. It is filled with tiny furniture and even tinier hazards. The fire poker is just a disguised pin. And then we must discuss the dolls. Victorian dolls are not meant to be cute. They are small Gothic masterpieces. They have cold porcelain faces. They have unblinking glass eyes. Their expressions seem to say, "I know all of your secrets." Some dolls even have real human hair. This feature raises more questions than it answers. Sleeping with one is a mistake you only make once. The rules of the playroom are unwritten but absolute. You are allowed to play. You are not allowed to make a visible mess. Your games should be educational, or they should at least pretend to be. A quiet game of needlework will earn you praise. A chaotic game of blind man's bluff is seen as a moral failing. Fun must be orderly. In the corner, you might find a set of iron hoops. Hoop rolling sounds like an innocent pastime, but it involves chasing a metal ring down a narrow hallway. The hallway is filled with priceless vases and your clumsy younger brother. Board games exist, but their rule books are longer than most novels. Accusations of cheating are a constant threat. Yet, for all its many dangers, the playroom is a sanctuary. It is a small oasis from the adult world of rules. Here you can stage a great battle with your tin soldiers. You can host a tiny tea party for your long-suffering teddy bear. If Nanny is distracted, you can even invent your own games. You can throw caution and a building block to the wind. Every playroom has its own legends. There is the toy you are forbidden to touch. It is usually broken and awaiting a repair that will never come. There is the story of the cousin who swallowed a marble and survived. And there is the ghostly creak of the toy cupboard late at night. These are the stories you whisper after the lights are out. In a stunning display of Victorian logic, some parents used baby cages. These wire boxes were hung outside apartment windows. They were for giving the infant fresh air. If you were lucky, you were only slightly chilled by the experience. If not, you learned about gravity very early. You also learned about the large pigeon population of London. The scene is almost unbelievable to our modern eyes. Rows of brick buildings stand tall against a gray sky. Jutting out from the windows are these strange little cages. Each one contains a swaddled baby. The infants blink in the hazy air. They look out over a city that is not yet ready for them. This was considered advanced parenting. Parenting books of the era were full of dire warnings. They spoke of the dangers of stale indoor air. So the solution seemed perfectly logical to them. Suspend your precious child several stories above the street. Treat them like a potted plant that wears a bonnet. It was all done in the name of good health. You are the baby in this situation. You are wrapped in so many layers of wool and flannel. You resemble a small, well-fed potato. Nanny carries you to the window. She places you inside the cage without any ceremony. The little door clanks shut, and there you are, hanging above the city. You are a tiny, confused citizen observing the world from a box. The theory was that fresh air was good for children. Unfortunately, Victorian fresh air was an industrial creation. It was a mixture of coal smoke and horse manure. It was not the crisp mountain breeze parents imagined. Still, they believed it built rosy cheeks. It was also thought to build a strong immune system. The local doctor would nod in approval as he walked by. Weather was only a minor concern for the baby cage. If it rained, a sheet of oilcloth was draped over the top. If it snowed, a hot water bottle might be tossed in for warmth. Summer brought its own set of problems. You were less likely to freeze, but you were now at the mercy of the city's pigeons. They saw your cage as an excellent place to perch. Life inside the baby cage was a lesson in resilience. You learned to watch the great double-decker buses rumble past. Sometimes an older sibling would try to drop a treat through the bars, a small crust of bread or a sticky piece of toffee. These were moments of pure joy in your suspended world. Your existence was strange, but it was not entirely lonely. Of course, the system was not perfect. A faulty latch could lead to a terrible accident. There are hushed family stories of babies being retrieved from laundry lines. Most of the time, however, the cage held firm. You were brought inside, covered in a fine layer of soot. You were praised for your robust and healthy nature. You also developed a lifelong suspicion of high windows. If you stepped out of line, you would face Victorian discipline. You might meet the end of a wooden spoon, or you might receive a well-practiced glare from your father. Corporal punishment was seen as an essential tool. The phrase, "spare the rod and spoil the child," was embroidered on many respectable cushions. It was a deeply held belief. Victorian discipline was a mixture of folklore and firm rules. There were long lists of these rules. They were often written in beautiful scripts. They were posted in the nursery and the kitchen. There were rules about keeping your elbows off the table. There were rules about perfect punctuality. To break a rule was to invite a swift correction. The arsenal of discipline was varied and impressive. There were wooden spoons for minor offenses. There were canes and slippers for more serious crimes. The all-purpose hairbrush was also a common tool. Your mother's glare could be felt across 3 rooms. Her sigh of disappointment was a weapon of immense power. Some families even had a designated punishment chair. It was usually an uncomfortable and ornate seat. It was placed in the hallway. Here a disobedient child would sit and reflect. They sat directly under a portrait of the sternest-looking ancestor. The shame of this public display was part of the punishment. Punishments were often designed to fit the crime. If you spilled your milk, you might stand in the corner. You might have to recite a prayer while you stood there. If you ran indoors, you were forced to march outside. You would march back and forth under the watchful eye of your nanny. She would time your punishment with her pocket watch. But the real weapon of Victorian discipline was shame. No one could scold a child like a Victorian adult. A single raised eyebrow from your father was terrifying. It was enough to make you reconsider your entire life. Even the family dog seemed to give you a judgmental look. Your failure was a topic of quiet household discussion. For a truly shocking crime, you faced public confession. Perhaps you tracked mud into the clean parlor. You would have to stand before the entire family. You would explain your actions and repent. Your siblings would try not to smirk. Your grandmother would sigh dramatically. Your actions were a blow against civilization itself. In the twisted logic of the era, this was all for your own good. Discipline builds virtue, they would say. The wooden spoon was not an instrument of terror. It was an instrument of love. It was a love expressed through firm lessons, and it was all based on the belief that one day you would thank them for it. You almost certainly would not. If you ever received a sweet, you were told to cherish it. You might not get another one until Christmas. Sweets were rare and expensive. They also came with the guarantee of an immediate toothache. Dentists in this era were armed with pliers. They had very little sympathy for your pain. The joy of a treat was always a calculated risk. The mere mention of a sweet would send a hush over the nursery. You might see a tin of barley sugar on a high shelf, or you might smell the faint scent of peppermint from the parlor. These were signals that a special occasion was near. Your heart would pound with a rare and powerful anticipation. A single jewel-like candy was a treasure. Victorian confections were objects of both awe and mild terror. Hard candies were wrapped by hand. They came in alarmingly bright colors. They were displayed in glass jars, like priceless museum relics. If your family was wealthy, you might get Turkish delight. It was dusted with enough powdered sugar to make you sneeze for a week. The giving of sweets was a serious family affair. Your mother would hand out the barley sugar drops. She did this with the solemnity of a high priestess. Each child received exactly one. You were instructed to savor it slowly. Biting was strictly forbidden. A sweet was a contemplative experience. It was not a moment for reckless enjoyment. Of course, the joy was always short-lived. Even before you finished the candy, you felt a familiar ache. It was a dull throb in your back tooth. This was a warning that a visit to the dentist was coming. The family dentist also worked as the local barber. His medical toolkit consisted of rusty pliers and a bottle of gin. He was a man of great optimism. If you survived the dentist, you learned the strict etiquette of treats. Never eat a sweet in front of guests. Never chew your candy noisily. And never trade your sweets for a sibling's marbles. Sharing was encouraged in theory. In practice, every child had a secret hiding place. A hollowed-out book was a popular choice for hiding your treasures. For less fortunate children, a treat was a different thing. It might be a single slice of dry fruitcake. Or if times were very hard, a spoonful of molasses. There were rumors of children who had tasted sugar cubes outside of Christmas, but these were usually dismissed as wild fairy tales. Regular sweetness was not a part of daily life. The town fair was a rare chance for true indulgence. Children were unleashed upon stalls of gingerbread men and sticky toffee. You would make yourself sick in under an hour. You would then spend the evening clutching your stomach. You would contemplate the meaning of moderation. Sweets were fleeting moments of happiness, but their memory lingered for years. Now it is time for school. Here you will memorize your times tables. You will recite Latin verbs. You will practice your penmanship until your fingers ache. The classrooms are cold and drafty. The teachers are famously strict. If you fail a spelling test, you will spend your lunch copying moral lessons. This is not a place for creative expression. Your day begins with the sound of a sharp bell. You walk through the great iron gates of the school. Your shoes must be perfectly polished. Your hair must be parted with mathematical precision. The schoolroom itself is a monument to discomfort. It is full of splintery wooden desks and leaky ink pots. The air smells of chalk dust and discipline. You find your assigned seat in the cold room. There is no choosing your own spot here. That would be an act of personal freedom. The draft on the floor makes your toes curl inside your boots. In the winter, you can see your own breath. You watch it form small clouds as you recite multiplication tables. In the summer, you sweat quietly. You must be careful not to smear your neat handwriting. The curriculum is designed for memorization, not understanding. You are expected to recite long passages of moral poetry. You must diagram complex sentences. You do this until the English language itself feels like a puzzle. Latin is taught with an air of grim duty. Nothing prepares you for the modern world like a dead language. Geography is a list of countries you will never see. The teachers are less instructors and more stern guards. Mr. Finch. The mathematics teacher can appear behind you without a sound. Miss Gable, the writing mistress, can spot a sloppy letter from across the room. She will not hesitate to assign extra work. Discipline is swift and often public. The teacher's cane is a constant threat. So is the dreaded dunce cap. Praise for good work is rare. You might receive a small gold star, or you might get the dubious honor of dusting the chalkboard. Failure, however, has serious consequences. A single misspelled word could mean an hour of writing lines. I must not be careless with my spelling, or you might have to stand and recite moral rules in front of the whole class. Lunchtime is not a relaxing break. You eat your cold bread and cheese in a drafty hall. There is no cheerful cafeteria here. There is only a hope that your sandwich was not crushed on the way to school. Playtime is a structured affair. It consists of organized marches around the bleak playground. A game of marbles in the corner is a thrilling act of rebellion. At the end of the day, you walk home. Your fingers are stained with black ink. Your wrist aches from writing. Your head is full of facts that may or may not be true. Your handwriting is perfect. Your respect for authority is absolute. You have survived another day of Victorian schooling. It was not about joy, it was about endurance. If you had a cough, you were given a special syrup. It contained alcohol and opium, and maybe a small pinch of hope. If you had a cut, it was covered with mercury ointment. The family medicine cabinet was a library of illegal substances. Nobody was entirely sure what any of them really did, but they were used with great confidence. Victorian medicine was not a precise science. It was more like a magical guessing game. Every household was equipped with a cabinet of strange cures. A modern pharmacist would surely call the police upon seeing it. Dosing was measured in generous spoonfuls. Side effects were usually ignored, unless they were interesting enough to discuss over dinner. The first line of defense for any illness was always a syrup. If you had a cough, your mother would produce a thick brown potion. It smelled like a distillery. It tasted much worse. If you asked what was in it, she would simply say, "Goodness." You knew this was code for alcohol and a variety of herbs, and a large dose of wishful thinking. The label on the bottle would list the amazing ingredients. It proudly advertised alcohol and chloroform. It often contained a healthy dose of opium. You were told to take 2 spoonfuls and lie down. You did as you were told. For the next 8 hours, you were either asleep or floating gently above your bed. You might even feel inspired to write a poem about the wallpaper. 4 minor cuts and scrapes, out came the mercury ointment. It was dabbed on with a clean finger. No one worried about the mercury. For a bigger wound, there was carbolic acid. This was followed by a layer of healing paste. The main ingredients in the paste were lard and blind optimism. Bruises were rubbed with goose fat. This was a popular and greasy remedy. Children were not supposed to have nerves, but if you seemed anxious, you were given a special tonic. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was a famous example. It was guaranteed to silence fussy children. It could also silence small farm animals. It was a powerful and popular medicine. It solved the problem of a noisy child very quickly. Colds and fevers were treated with great creativity. A hot mustard plaster was slapped on your chest. It was left there until you either recovered or developed a new rash. A necklace of garlic was tied around your throat. This was meant to draw out the illness. If that failed, the family doctor was called. He would arrive with his black bag and his collection of leeches. Stomach aches received the most interesting cures. You might be given a digestive cordial. This was a nice name for a flavored paint stripper. The most famous remedy was castor oil. This was a punishment so terrible it was a legend. The best medicine in the Victorian era was a strong constitution. Simple survival was its own kind of cure. The only thing more dangerous than your nanny is your siblings. You form shaky alliances in the nursery. You negotiate for a small patch of closet space. You occasionally stage a daring escape attempt from the room. These attempts are always foiled by a creaky stair or by your little brother's inability to keep a secret. The nursery is a quiet battlefield. Sibling dynamics are a complex mixture of a chess match and a riot. Shifting alliances and sudden betrayals are common. You learn very quickly that nothing is sacred. Your favorite wooden top will vanish if you turn your back. Your secret stash of peppermints will disappear. The only evidence will be a trail of sticky fingerprints. This is a lesson in constant vigilance. Your allies and your enemies change with the situation. When your nanny enters the room, all fighting stops. Everyone instantly becomes a perfect and innocent angel. We are all just reading quietly, Nanny. The moment she leaves, the real games begin again. Whispers and elbow nudges replace polite silence. The war continues. Closet space is a matter of life and death. The wardrobe is technically large enough for everyone, but one particular shelf is the most coveted territory in the room. Winning this territory is a great victory, but your victory is always temporary. The next day you might be overthrown in a silent coup. Your favorite shirt will be mysteriously missing. Escape attempts are a popular and thrilling pastime. You and your sister might plot for days. You plan to sneak into the kitchen for an illegal slice of cake. The plan depends on perfect timing and absolute silence. The plan is always ruined by your little brother. He cannot whisper, or he will shout, now just as Nanny is walking down the hall. There is always a designated scapegoat. This is usually the youngest child. They are forced to confess when a plan goes wrong. This gives them a strange kind of immunity. But it also means no one trusts them ever again. Betrayal is a currency in the nursery. So are buttons and bits of colored string. You learn to negotiate for everything. But there are also powerful moments of unity. Nothing brings siblings together like an external threat. The sound of Nanny's approaching footsteps is one such threat. The looming horror of cod liver oil is another. In these moments, all arguments are forgotten. You present a united and silent front. You are a team against the world of adults. The evenings can sometimes offer a rare peace. There are shared stories whispered under scratchy wool blankets. There are stifled giggles about the day's events. You make grand plans for future mischief. In these quiet moments, you admit a secret truth. You would be terribly lonely without your fellow conspirators. You are all in this strange childhood together. Victorian parents had advice for every occasion. Don't read too much, or your eyes will fall out. If you swallow a cherry pit, a tree will grow inside you. Their advice was never comforting. It was usually alarming. It was often based on something they overheard at a funeral. The world was a dangerous place. Their advice was meant to protect you. Your day began with guidance and ended with warnings. Advice was served as frequently as tea. It was delivered with great seriousness. It was given whether you asked for it or not. If you stood near an open window for too long, you received a lecture. You would hear the sad story of a cousin who caught a chill and was never quite right again. Leaving the house with damp hair was a serious crime. Your mother would stop you at the door. She would tell you a cautionary tale. She spoke of a young girl from a distant town. This girl went outside with damp hair. Something terrible happened to her. Your mother could never remember the details, but she was sure it was very unpleasant. Every minor illness was an opportunity for more advice. A simple sniffle was not just a cold. It was a moral warning from the universe. You were prescribed mustard plasters and smelly vapors. Your father's advice was usually about attitude. The best cure for a sore throat is a brisk walk, he would declare. He believed a positive outlook could defeat a fever. Reading was your one true escape, but it was subject to a long list of warnings. Do not read by candlelight, or your eyesight will fail. Do not read novels, or your mind will fill with nonsense. This was especially true for girls. You were allowed to read the Bible, but you were told not to get too excited by the dramatic parts. The real gems of advice came at the dinner table. never trust a man who wears yellow gloves. If you cross your eyes, they will get stuck that way forever. Always carry a clean handkerchief and a good alibi. These pieces of wisdom were passed down through generations. Their origins were a complete mystery. Your mother was an expert on botanical warnings. Fruit pits and apple seeds were a source of great anxiety. She believed they held the power to create internal gardens. You would secretly check your stomach in the mirror. You were looking for any sign of a tiny sprout. Her warnings were vivid and very convincing. This advice was rarely practical. You were told that laughing too loudly would frighten the horses. You were told that asking too many questions was a French habit. Yet, in their own anxious way, your parents meant well. They were trying to prepare you for a confusing world. They used folklore and superstition as their guide. They armed you with fear. The nursery walls were coated in lead-based paint. The beautiful green curtains were made with arsenic-dyed fabric. Asbestos insulation lurked in many cozy corners of the house. It is a genuine wonder that anyone survived to become an adult. But at least the room was insulated from drafts. It was also insulated from a state of full consciousness sometimes. Victorian interior design is best described as lethal elegance. Everything in your nursery was a potential health hazard, but at least it was all tastefully coordinated. You woke up each morning in a room of delicate pastel colors. The cheerful green on the walls was known as Paris green. It was made with a large amount of arsenic. It was lovely in the morning light. The lush patterned carpet also contained hidden dangers. It was soft under your feet, but the rich colors were often made using mercury. The curtains billowed gently in the breeze. Their deep green shade was also from arsenic. You were warned not to chew on the drapes, but no one ever warned the family cat. Her health remained a lingering mystery. Your toys were no safer than the walls. The dollhouse furniture was painted in bright lead-based colors. The paint would slowly chip off onto your sticky fingers. Your painted alphabet blocks looked charming on the shelf. They looked less charming after you chewed on one out of boredom. You were left with a strange metallic taste in your mouth. Even the humble teething ring could be a source of poison. It was often made of bone or ivory, but it might be dipped in whatever paint was left from the hallway. You would gnaw on it for hours to soothe your aching gums. You were unknowingly ingesting small but steady doses of lead. This was a common and unrecorded danger. If you happened to trip and fall, you met another hazard. You might land near the coal scuttle. It was often dusted with powdered asbestos. Asbestos was a modern miracle material. It kept away fire and insulated against the cold. It was stuffed into cracks to keep out strange smells. No one knew it was slowly poisoning the air you breathed. At night, you were tucked into a bed full of questionable things. The mattress was a patchwork of horsehair and old feathers. The pillows smelled faintly of lavender and camphor. The scents were used to cover up the smell of slow chemical decay. The only window jammed shut in the summer. It opened with a loud scream in the winter. Fresh air was a rare visitor. In a strange way, there was an upside to this toxic world. If you survived your Victorian nursery, you would be very resilient. You would never fear a little household dust again. Family legend told of an uncle who licked the wallpaper and survived. He was never quite the same after that. In the Victorian home, you did not just live with history. You inhaled it every day. Your parents read a new article in a popular magazine. Suddenly, the entire family is eating nothing but tapioca for a week. The Victorian era loved a good diet craze. These fads usually involved boiled cabbage or a strange substance called toast water. No meal was safe from the latest trend in questionable science. It was a time of great culinary anxiety. One day, your breakfast is a hearty bowl of porridge. The next, it is a strange, slippery elm gruel. This new food was recommended by a doctor. His only visible qualification was a magnificent set of mutton chop sideburns. Lunch might be reduced to a dish called invalid jelly, or you might get the even more ominous beef tea. This was just a cup of warm, meaty water. At the heart of every Victorian diet was a simple belief. Food was about building fortitude, not about pleasure. Flavor was seen as a dangerous and frivolous thing. Variety was deeply suspicious. Anything that tasted remotely good was accused of corrupting your moral fiber. Enjoying your food was a sign of a weak character. The family cook had the difficult job of creating these meals. She was tasked with interpreting the latest fads. She spent half her day boiling vegetables into submission. She spent the other half explaining why the dessert now had the faint taste of soap. She was a woman of immense patience and culinary despair. There was always a new superfood promising miracle cures. Arrowroot was very popular for a time. It was supposed to soothe the stomach and calm the temper. Someone's uncle would advocate for pure beef extract. He claimed it could cure everything from sadness to a sprained ankle. Your mother would buy a large jar of it. She would add it to everything. Medical endorsements were printed in every newspaper. Dr. Quibbles. Digestive powders claimed to turn plain cabbage into a delicacy. If the good doctor was pictured with a stern expression, you knew his product was trustworthy. Your mother would read the testimonials aloud. My digestion has never been more efficient, she would read. You would eye the prune dish with deep suspicion. No Victorian diet was complete without a water-based drink. Toast water was a particular favorite. Stale bread was soaked in boiling water. The water was then strained and served lukewarm. It tasted exactly as you would imagine. Cabbage water was another aromatic beverage. It was designed to test the limits of your obedience. Of course, these diets never lasted for very long. Just as you resigned yourself to a month of boiled turnips, a new trend would appear. The fads faded as quickly as they arrived, but they left behind vivid childhood memories. You learned to politely pretend you enjoyed your food. You also learned the fine art of hiding it in the nearest potted plant. Christmas would arrive in a flurry of anxiety and pine needles. You would receive a single handmade toy. You would also get a cold orange, and you would get a stern warning not to play too loudly. Everyone was deeply sentimental. Everyone was also slightly ill from the previous night's rich food. Victorian Christmas was an endurance event. The season began weeks in advance. The family would launch a full-scale cleaning of the house. They would dust and polish every surface. They would debate if holly or mistletoe was less likely to poison the cat. The whole house smelled of dried oranges and cloves. It also smelled of the faint panic of a forgotten plum pudding. The Christmas tree was a prickly marvel. It was a tradition imported from Germany. It was erected in the drawing room with military precision. You were enlisted to help decorate. This meant you had to stand perfectly still. You were told not to touch the fragile glass ornaments. The candles were clipped to the branches. They were a beautiful and respected fire hazard. On Christmas morning, you would wake up very early. You would be shaking with a mixture of excitement and cold. The presents were simple and symbolic. You might get a painted wooden soldier or a knitted scarf, and you would get the long-awaited orange. This citrus fruit was the equivalent of winning a small lottery. Your toy was powered by imagination. Batteries had not yet been invented. The main event of the day was the Christmas dinner. It was a triumph of Victorian excess. The table groaned under the weight of a roast goose. There were heaps of potatoes and mysterious jellies. The famous plum pudding was the grand finale. It was soaked in brandy and set on fire. The children would gasp as the blue flames danced. After the dinner came the long and rambling speeches. There were toasts to the Queen and the country. Sentimentality flowed like cheap sherry. Your parents would reminisce about the Christmases of their youth. My own Christmas gift was a single walnut, grandfather would say, and we were grateful for it. The stories grew more dramatic with each passing year. Then came the period of enforced merriment. You played parlor games with rules no one understood. There were dramatic readings from Charles Dickens. There was a brisk and bracing walk in the frozen garden. This was to aid digestion. You were required to thank every adult for your gift, even if the gift was a pair of scratchy woolen socks. By evening, the mood was a mixture of joy and exhaustion. As the gaslights flickered, you would gather to sing carols. The singing was heartfelt and usually off-key. A Victorian Christmas was a masterclass in patience. As you finally fell into bed, you clutched your orange. You were a survivor of another festive season. Pets were kept for building character and resilience. You might have a small family dog. You might have a canary in a cage. Or you might have a surprisingly aggressive hedgehog. But your most constant companions were the family lice. Nobody seemed particularly worried about them. They were just another part of the household. Official pets were seen as useful tools for moral instruction. A dog was supposed to teach you about loyalty. A canary was meant to teach you patience. A hedgehog taught you humility, mostly because it would bite you. You were tasked with feeding and cleaning your animal. This was a serious responsibility. It was a lesson in the realities of life and death. For every official pet, there was a horde of unofficial ones. The Victorian nursery was alive with small and industrious creatures. Spiders lived happily in the corners. A parade of ants would appear whenever you spilled some jam. Bedbugs made themselves at home in your mattress. Mice held secret meetings inside the walls. The house was a busy ecosystem. And then there were the family lice. They set up a permanent shop in your hair. They were cheerfully ignored by almost everyone. Only your nanny seemed to notice. She had a special fine-toothed comb. She also had a 1,000-yard stare. She would deal with the problem with quiet and grim efficiency. It was a normal part of the weekly routine. Attempts to control the other pests were not very effective. Sticky flypaper would hang from the ceiling. It smelled faintly of vinegar. Lavender sachets were hidden under pillows to keep away moths. The family cat was hired to hunt mice, but she spent most of her days napping in the sun. She seemed offended by the very idea of work. Sometimes pets and pests would overlap in surprising ways. Your brother might try to adopt a clever mouse. He would name it and sneak it pieces of cheese. One year he tried to raise tadpoles in the water jug. This led to a very awkward situation during bath time. It also led to a new family rule about amphibians in the nursery. There were many animal escapades and emergencies. The dog might chew up a priceless family heirloom. The hedgehog could escape its box. It might be discovered later, curled up in a drawer of clean socks. Every mishap became a famous family story. The story would be told again and again at dinner. It grew more dramatic with each new telling. Caring for these creatures taught you a strange mixture of things. You learned empathy and stoicism. You learned that life was both precious and messy. You mourned your lost pets with a sincere and brief sadness. And as you fell asleep at night, you heard many sounds: the sigh of a dog, the rustle of a mouse. You were never truly alone in your nursery zoo. Play was strictly supervised in the Victorian era. It was also expected to be educational. Rich children were given expensive rocking horses. They played with geography games. Poor children played with sticks. They also played with whatever small rodents they could catch. The amount of fun you had was proportional to your social class. For children in grand houses, the nursery was full of toys. There were hand-painted doll houses. There were intricate puzzles of the British Empire. All the colonies were colored in a cheerful shade of pink. These toys were meant to develop the mind. This really meant they were meant to remind you of Britain's power. Play was another form of lesson. Even among the wealthy, playtime was not a wild affair. Your nanny would hover at the door. She was ready to stop any sign of excessive merriment. Outdoor games were refined and orderly. You might play a gentle game of croquet on the lawn. Shouting and running were heavily discouraged. Noisy children were said to have loose morals. For working-class children, games were improvised masterpieces. The street was your personal playground. The entire world was your toy box. You could roll an old hoop down a smoky alley. You could stage epic battles with nothing but a stick and your imagination. You might even try to race a mouse, although mice in London were notoriously uncooperative. The games of the poor often reflected their hard lives. You might play a game of Dodge the Constable, or you might play Help Bring in the Laundry Before It Rains. This last game felt more like an unpaid internship. There was no clear line between your playtime and your work. Survival was the most important game of all. Your clothing also decided how you could play. Rich children were wrapped in many layers of wool and lace. Any attempt to run would usually end in collapse. Poor children wore simple hand-me-down clothes. Their boots were often 2 sizes too big, but they had a greater freedom of movement. They could climb a tree without fear of ripping their fancy suit. Games of make-believe were universal, but their themes were very different. In a wealthy home, you played afternoon tea. You poured imaginary tea for your slightly haunted-looking dolls. In a back alley, you played factory worker, or you played shopkeeper. Your imagination was shaped by the world you saw every day. Some games did cross the social divide. Marbles were played with passion by all children, but the rich had marbles of polished glass. The poor used marbles made of clay. Skipping rope was also a shared favorite, but wealthy children recited French verbs while they skipped. Poor children were free to shout rude rhymes at passing carriages. Outside the front door, the streets were a perilous obstacle course. There were runaway horses to dodge. There were mysterious puddles to avoid. There were gangs of soot-covered chimney sweeps. You were warned daily about the dangers of the city. Fresh air was considered healthy, but the outside world was full of bad influences. Before you were allowed to leave the house, your parents gave you stern warnings. Do not speak to any strangers. Do not pick up anything that is not yours. And most importantly, if you see a puddle, you must cross the street. The reason for this was never fully explained, but one misstep would reveal the surprising depth of a Victorian puddle. The sights and sounds of the street were relentless. Carriages would rattle by on the cobblestones. Horses would snort and stamp their feet. Market vendors would holler out their prices for the day. Somewhere, a dog was always barking. A street musician was usually butchering a waltz on a battered violin. You had to keep your wits about you. Crossing the street was a major and dangerous event. The horses always came first. You had to assume they could not see you. The hansom cabs raced past in a blur. Milk carts and fishmongers would barrel down the road. They left a trail of sloshing water and the occasional free fish. If you were not careful, you would be splashed or jumped. The chimney sweeps were mostly boys, your own age. They would dart in and out of the chaotic traffic. Their faces were black with soot. Their eyes gleamed with a wild energy. You were told not to speak to them, but you could not help but admire their freedom. They knew all the city's secret shortcuts and hiding places. Bad influences were said to be lurking on every corner. There were the street performers and the newsboys. They sold cheap newspapers full of shocking stories. Your parents were especially wary of children with no shoes. If you came home with a new accent, you faced a serious interrogation. It was as if bad manners were a contagious disease. And then there was the air itself. Victorian fresh air was an acquired taste. It was an equal mixture of coal, smoke, and manure. And there were the less identifiable smells. Your mother called miasmas. You were made to wear a scarf over your mouth. You were scolded if you so much as coughed in the street. Returning home was its own kind of adventure. You were inspected for new bruises or missing buttons. Your muddy boots were left by the door. Your face was scrubbed with a rough cloth. You may not have found any fortune on the street, but you had survived another day in the great obstacle course, and you were ready to do it all again tomorrow. Your future was determined very early in the Victorian world. Boys were sent away to prep school. They learned Latin and the mysterious rules of cricket. Girls were sent to a finishing school. They perfected the important art of fainting gracefully. Both were taught that emotions are best suppressed. They should be saved for adulthood, or at least until after tea time. In this world, education was about becoming a proper example of your gender. For a boy, school was a kind of battlefield. It was lined with difficult Latin lessons and algebraic misery. And there was always a game of cricket. It was usually played in a cold drizzle, a drizzle that would make a duck reconsider its life choices. The goal of a boy's education was to make him robust and serious. He was also expected to be quietly miserable. Every day was structured with military precision. There was chapel in the morning. Then came arithmetic and history. There might be a quick fight behind the gymnasium. Then came handwriting practice. Ink blots were considered an act of high treason. For girls, education was an entirely different experience. It was more like a tea party than a boot camp, but it had its own special terrors. A finishing school did not finish your education. It finished any independent thoughts you might have once had. The curriculum was designed to create a perfect future wife, not a thinking individual. The lessons for a girl included French conversation. This was mostly about the weather and flowers. She learned to paint watercolors of forget-me-nots. She had endless practice at the piano. She always had to wear gloves. This was to keep her hands as soft as her opinions. Her mind was not considered a priority. The real focus of a girl's education was on accomplishments. Can you pour tea without spilling a single drop? Can you faint with elegance if someone says a shocking word? You were taught to glide into a room. You were taught to speak in a voice as quiet as a small bird. You could have opinions only on the weather or the arrangement of lilies in a vase. The repression of emotion was the most important lesson for both genders. A boy must never cry unless he was struck by a cricket ball, and then he should ideally cry in Latin. A girl was allowed to faint, but real tears were reserved for moments of high drama. Anger and ambition were to be bottled up. They were to be hidden away like a secret diary. And yet, despite this rigid system, there were small, secret rebellions. Boys would trade forbidden novels under their desks. Girls would whisper stories about daring female explorers. Both would dream of a world with more freedom. Their education did succeed in one thing. It taught them how to survive. It taught them the art of the poker face. Teething was an ordeal for everyone in the Victorian household. The arrival of new teeth was less a milestone and more a trial by fire. For the baby, it was a time of endless drool. It was a time of red cheeks. It was a time of wanting to gnaw on anything that stood still. For the parents, it was a time of desperate and dangerous remedies. The first and most time-honored solution was the humble bread crust. A piece of stale bread was handed to the baby. It had the consistency of fossilized wood. The idea was to let the baby chew on it to toughen up the gums. If this provided any comfort, it was a miracle. The more likely outcome was a frustrated baby with a soggy crust. If the bread crust failed, the parents would escalate their efforts. The next step was often the use of spirits. A small amount of brandy was dabbed directly onto the baby's gums. This was for purely medicinal purposes, of course. This practice resulted in a generation of infants. They had a surprisingly high tolerance for alcohol and a tendency to nap soundly through thunderstorms. But nothing in the Victorian era was as famous as the soothing syrups. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was a miracle in a bottle. It promised to relieve all of a baby's suffering. The secret to its success was a simple one. The main ingredients were morphine and alcohol. It was a powerful and effective tranquilizer for a fussy child. Parents would sing the praises of this miracle cure. He slept through the night, and so did we, they would say. They would quietly ignore the other side effects. The baby might be smiling blankly at the wallpaper for 3 days. The syrup did not soothe the pain. It simply rendered the child unconscious for several hours. This was considered a great success. If for some reason the syrup was not available, there were other options. There were teething powders that contained mercury. There were bits of coral strung on a ribbon. This was tied around the baby's neck for magical protection. The family medicine chest resembled an alchemist's laboratory. It was full of hope and unlabeled poisons. Visiting relatives always arrived with their own terrible advice. Rub the gums with honey, they would suggest, or let the child chew on a silver spoon. This last piece of advice was only useful if you were related to a duke. The family would try every remedy. They were desperate for a quiet night's sleep. When the teeth finally emerged, there was a collective celebration. The parents would breathe a great sigh of relief. The nanny would pour herself a congratulatory glass of sherry. The baby, now equipped with a new set of weapons, would turn their attention to biting everyone. This difficult rite of passage was over. The child had proven they were a true survivor. Occasionally you were marched into the countryside. This was for healthful exercise. You were bundled in at least 5 layers of wool. You were also forbidden from touching anything interesting. Nature was considered to be very educational, but you were only allowed to observe it from a safe and non-muddy distance. A nature walk was not a wild adventure. A Victorian nature walk was more like a moving lesson in caution. The adults were armed with walking sticks and great anxiety. They would herd you and your siblings out the front door. Your hat was firmly secured to your head. Your gloves were buttoned up to your elbows. There is no such thing as bad weather, your father would say. There are only weak constitutions. As you walked down the lane, your nanny was on high alert. She watched for the many hidden dangers. A puddle was a serious threat. A low-hanging branch was a menace. A stray dog was a cause for immediate alarm. Your natural urge to leap into a hedge was met with a withering look. You also received a lecture on the diseases of wild plants. You were allowed to admire the flowers from a safe distance. You were also encouraged to recite their proper Latin names. If you attempted to pick a simple buttercup, your moral fiber was questioned. Your gloves would be inspected for any signs of dirt. Nature was a museum. You were not allowed to touch the exhibits. The approved activities on a nature walk were very specific. You could point politely at the shapes of clouds. You could note the different types of leaves on the trees. You could ask questions that had simple and moral answers. Bird song was to be admired in silence. It was never to be imitated. Climbing a tree was completely out of the question. Despite all of these restrictions, there was a quiet magic to be found. The countryside was a beautiful patchwork of meadows and woods. The air smelled of new grass and distant rain. Even the constant threat of a drizzle could not dampen your curiosity. You might catch a thrilling glimpse of a rabbit's tail, or a distant fox making a run for the woods. Every walk was also an opportunity for your education. You might be required to recite a poem about a skylark. You might have to sketch an acorn with perfect accuracy. If you showed too much enthusiasm, an adult would correct you. True appreciation of nature is quiet and contemplative, they would say. This meant, please stop looking like you are having fun. You would return home muddy, only in your dreams. The real dirt was removed with a stiff brush and a boot scraper. The Victorian nature walk was a strange paradox. You were out in the wild world, yet you were held firmly in check by rules and wool. The real adventure was finding a small moment of freedom, a dandelion puff snatched when no one was looking. The Victorians had a great love for a good haunting. You grew up in a world filled with a gentle terror. You were afraid of jack-o'-lanterns and mysterious fogs. Every unexplained cough was blamed on a nearby ghost. You were taught to keep your soul tidy at all times, just in case a spirit was watching you. The supernatural was a part of daily life. The nursery itself was filled with whispers and shadows. Every creak of the old floorboards was a ghostly footstep. Every flicker of the candle was a spirit passing by. An older sibling would tell you never to whistle indoors. It was said to summon the dead. You were told to cross yourself before looking in a mirror at night. Mirrors were doorways for ghosts. Superstition was woven into every small domestic ritual. If you dropped a fork at the dinner table, a visitor was coming. The visitor might be a ghost. It would definitely be someone with muddy boots. Spilling salt was a terrible omen. You had to immediately throw a pinch over your left shoulder. This was to blind the devil, who was always standing behind you. Bedtime was when things became truly spooky. This was the time for ghost stories. Nanny would tell tales of haunted attics and wandering souls. She spoke of vengeful spirits who disliked children, who giggled after dark. You would lie awake in your bed with your heart pounding. You would watch the shadows stretch across the arsenic green wallpaper. Guilt and fear were close partners in the Victorian mind. Every small misdeed was sure to have supernatural consequences. Did you steal a small jam tart from the kitchen? A ghost would surely know about it. Ghosts, you were told, preferred to haunt naughty and lazy children. You became an expert at confessing your sins. You hoped to avoid any ghostly attention. Holidays were especially rich with these anxieties. At Halloween, jack-o'-lanterns were not carved for fun. They were carved to scare away the evil spirits. On Christmas Eve, the family would gather by the fire. They would tell ghost stories in the flickering candlelight. You would shiver from both the cold and the fear. Christmas was the most haunted time of the year. Even your daily chores were governed by a web of strange omens. You had to stir the Christmas pudding clockwise for good luck. You must never rock an empty cradle. It was an invitation for tragedy. Finding a spider in your shoe was either very good luck or very bad luck. It all depended on which aunt you asked. The rules were complex. Yet, amid all the dread, there was a peculiar comfort. Superstition offered a kind of logic for an illogical world. It explained the drafty rooms and the mysterious illnesses. It gave you a set of rules to follow. You would whisper protective charms and avoid walking under ladders. These beliefs filled your childhood with drama. They also filled it with a lifelong respect for salt shakers. Puberty would arrive with no warning. It would also arrive with absolutely no explanation. Victorian parents handled this confusing time by ignoring it completely. They left you to figure out the horrors of adolescence alone. Your only guides were a dusty medical encyclopedia and the terrifying stories of your older cousins. It was a time of great mystery. One day you were a child playing with marbles in the nursery. The next, your body began to betray you in every way imaginable. You grew in places that were not supposed to grow. Your voice would squeak when you meant to speak with dignity. You developed a sudden and mortifying awareness of your own elbows. You were more awkward than a newborn calf on ice. The official response from your parents was a profound silence. The word puberty was never spoken aloud. If you asked what was happening, they would direct you to the family library. The medical book offered strange illustrations. It also offered unhelpful advice. Cultivate fortitude and avoid excessive reading, it would say. Take a cold bath every single day. Instead of clear explanations, you received cryptic warnings. Sit up straight, you are getting a stoop, your father would mutter. Do not eat too much cheese at supper, your mother would say, or you will get ideas. No one ever explained what kind of ideas you might get from cheese. You were left to wonder in confused silence. For girls, this time was particularly bewildering. You might receive a packet of mysterious blue ribbons. You knew that something important was happening. If you asked your mother, she would simply blush. She would recommend you say some extra prayers. The women of the household would become secretive. They offered strange advice, like never sit on a cold stone step. For boys, the transition to manhood was equally mysterious. It was also considerably more itchy. Suddenly, you were expected to spend hours playing cricket. You had to recite poetry with a new and serious gravity. Your older cousins would corner you behind the stables. They would tell you alarming stories about what to expect. Most of them involved sudden whiskers. The biggest challenge of all was dealing with your new emotions. You were trained to suppress all of your feelings, but adolescence was a riot of new sensations. There was rage and joy and embarrassment. These feelings would surge through you all at once. You were expected to weather these storms with a calm expression and the occasional brisk walk in the garden. Eventually, you emerged from this ordeal. You were battered but a little wiser. You had a new appreciation for quiet corners. You had mastered the art of faking a calm exterior while panicking inside. You finally understood why the adults pretended not to notice. In the grand tradition of the era, some things were simply better left unsaid. Bedtime meant a brisk and hurried prayer. It was followed by a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride. And maybe you received a spoonful of a sedative sleeping draught. The old house would creak around you. The gas lamps in the hall would hiss softly. You would drift off to sleep. You were grateful to have survived another long day. The evening routine was a ceremony of winding down, but it was not a gentle or comforting process. You would kneel at your iron-framed bed for your prayers. The prayer was said quickly. This was to avoid the cold seeping into your bones. It was also said with enough feeling to keep away any listening ghosts. The nursery was very chilly after the fire went out. After your prayer came the bedtime story. But the word story is a very generous term. Most nights it was a short morality tale. It was delivered in a whisper by your nanny. She told fables of greed and laziness. She spoke of the terrible fate of children who talked back at dinner. The message was always the same. Virtue is rewarded. Naughtiness is punished. For a child who was restless, there was always the sleeping draught. Victorian pharmacology was enthusiastic, to say the least. You might be given a spoonful of a dark syrup. It promised a soothing and peaceful sleep. It contained a healthy amount of opium, an amount that could put a grown bear to sleep for a week. Your parents saw it as a helpful tool. If you protested, you were reminded of a distant aunt. This aunt took the draught every night, and she lived to the impressive age of 34. The syrup tasted faintly of licorice and deep regret. Soon you would be drifting in and out of consciousness. You were at least spared from hearing all the strange noises of the old house at night. The house was full of its own nocturnal symphony. The floorboards would creak and groan. The wind would rattle the window frames. Someone in a distant room would cough. The cough always suggested they had just seen a ghost. The gas lamps in the hall would hiss and flicker. Their light created dancing shadows on your bedroom wall. But bedtime was not a time of complete terror. There were small and simple comforts to be found. You could hear the soft thump of a sibling's foot from the next bed. You could hear the distant clatter of a late-night carriage on the street. You could whisper secret plans for tomorrow under the scratchy blankets. These were moments of quiet connection. Eventually, sleep would finally arrive. It was not a gentle sleep. It was a total sleep. It was brought on by pure exhaustion and a bit of tranquilizer. You would dream of strange adventures and haunted nurseries. You would also dream of endless bowls of gray gruel. As you fell into this deep sleep, you knew one thing. Surviving bedtime was its own kind of victory. Potty training in the Victorian era was a serious business. It was less about stickers and positive reinforcement. It was more about public embarrassment and porcelain. Your personal chamber pot might be decorated with flowers, or it might have a moral warning painted on the bottom. There was no flushing. There was only a grim trip to the backyard. For a Victorian child, the chamber pot was a constant presence. It was a lesson in humility. It lurked beneath your bed. It was always in danger of being discovered by an adult. Some pots were painted with cheerful scenes, a jolly goose or a smiling cherub, but others bore stern messages. Look before you leap was a common one. This was a moral enterprise. Your first lessons in bathroom etiquette began very early. Your nanny would deliver a speech about proper comportment. She used phrases like timely evacuation and do not make a spectacle of yourself. You were taught to ask politely. You were taught to never, ever discuss your business at the breakfast table. Such talk would cause a scandal. The act itself was filled with many dangers. The chamber pot was not very large. It was not very steady. It was prone to tipping over at the critical moment. The stakes were extremely high. A successful attempt would earn a brief nod of approval. A misfire was a disaster that required a swift cover-up. The family dog was often blamed. Potty training was also very public knowledge. Your older siblings would delight in sharing horror stories. They told tales of their own early failures. Remember, when Cousin Edmund missed the pot, they would say, he had to eat cold cabbage for a week. These stories were designed to haunt your dreams. They were meant to keep you vigilant at all costs. Accidents were inevitable, and they were treated as cautionary tales. There were no cheerful words of encouragement. There was only the brisk efficiency of Victorian discipline. There would be a change of sheets. There would be a warning look from your mother. She would mutter something about slippery slopes and moral decay. Your mistake was a serious failure. The greatest dread for many children was the outdoor privy. This was a small shed at the bottom of the garden. The journey there at night was a terrifying one. You had to carry a lantern. The privy itself was cold and drafty. It was full of spiders and strange echoing drips. You were told this experience would build your character. Despite all of this, you eventually adapted. You learned the delicate art of balance. You learned the great value of discretion. The chamber pot became a simple fact of life. It was a symbol of Victorian ingenuity and resilience, and it was a symbol of their belief that virtue could be enforced, one uncomfortable trip at a time. Getting dressed in Victorian times was a full contact sport. The number of buttons and buckles on an outfit was staggering. Young girls had to wrestle with miniature corsets. Young boys were nearly strangled by their starched collars. Everyone was expected to wear at least 3 layers. This was true even in the heat of summer. Your comfort was not a consideration. Your day began not with a gentle stretch. It began with the sound of Nanny throwing open the curtains. Then the daily battle with your clothing would commence. Each item was stacked in a formidable tower at the end of your bed. There were petticoats and chemises and stockings. There were garters and undershirts. There was no escape from the layers. For girls, the first and greatest obstacle was always the corset. It was known in the family as the embrace of discipline. A child's corset was meant to encourage perfect posture. It was also meant to encourage an early sense of despair. Nanny would pull the laces with the skill of a sailor. You would feel taller and thinner. You would also feel significantly less able to breathe. Boys had to contend with the terrible starched collar. It was stiff and upright. It felt like a medieval torture device. Your mother would stand you before the mirror each morning. She would tug the collar up to your chin. Any attempt to loosen it was a sign of moral collapse. A droopy collar was the first step on the road to ruin. Layering was not just a suggestion. It was a sacred and unbreakable ritual. Summer or winter, indoors or out, you were swaddled in wool. You were also wrapped in flannel and sometimes velvet. Children were delicate creatures, you were told. They must be insulated from the world at all times. This was a curious belief in the middle of July. You would sweat quietly. The act of dressing was so exhausting, it was like morning exercise. Your socks would sag, your garters would snap. Buttons had a magical ability to vanish at the slightest touch. Ribbons would tangle. The family dog would try to help. He would steal your best glove and bury it in the garden. By the end, you were more trussed than dressed. Accidents were, of course, inevitable. Someone would catch their long sash on a door handle. Someone would rip their petticoat while trying to sit down. A popped button was a public tragedy. It resulted in an immediate mending session. It also resulted in a lecture on the importance of being careful. A stitch in time saves embarrassment at tea. Special occasions brought even greater perils. There were lace collars with microscopic hooks. There were hats pinned to your scalp with cruel optimism. There were shoes so tight they might have been made for a different species. You would sit for the family portrait. You were in an agony of pinches and itches. You would practice a fixed and panicked smile. Getting dressed in Victorian times was a full contact sport. Whether you were 5 or 15, the number of buttons was a challenge. Young girls wrestled with their stays. Boys were trapped by their starched collars, and everyone was bundled in far too many layers. Nothing says childhood freedom like sweating through wool in July. Your appearance was a reflection of your family's dignity. Your morning began not with a yawn but with a battle. First came the battle with your clothing. Then came the battle for correct posture. You were a miniature adult in training. You had to learn to carry yourself with a seriousness that did not feel natural. Your body was not your own. It was a project to be managed by the adults around you. Your world was a place of strong and strange sensations. The taste of bland porridge in the morning, the smell of coal smoke and harsh carbolic soap, the constant itchy feeling of a wool undershirt against your skin, the sight of peeling arsenic wallpaper in the dim light. These were the textures of your young life. They were inescapable. Your mind was also under constant surveillance. You were observed by your nanny and your parents. You were taught to suppress your natural joy. You learned to perform the role of a quiet and obedient child. Your true thoughts were kept hidden in a secret place. To express them was to risk correction and a lecture on morality. You were told that all of this was for your own good. Every uncomfortable meal was character building. Every cold bath was for your health. Every restrictive piece of clothing was for your posture. This was the constant message you received. Hardship was a gift. It was preparing you for the difficulties of the adult world. The rules of your world were full of strange contradictions. Fresh air was vital for your health, so you were placed in a wire cage and dangled from a window. Nature was a source of great educational value, so you were marched through it and forbidden from touching anything. Play was important for your development, so it was supervised and stripped of all chaotic fun. Through all of this, you learned one great lesson. You learned how to survive. You developed a keen sense of resilience. You learned the cunning art of hiding your true feelings. You mastered the poker face before you were 10 years old. These were the real skills you acquired. They were more useful than Latin verbs or watercolor painting. This world may seem bizarre to us now. It was a place of danger and discipline. Yet it was the reality for millions of children. If you enjoy these journeys into the strange corners of the past, please consider subscribing to Medieval Nocturnes. It helps us continue our explorations. And now, let us prepare to leave this world behind. So, as you drift off tonight in your own quiet bed, spare a thought. Think about your central heating. Think about your mattress that does not bite back. Then spare a gentle thought for the children of the Victorian era, and for the parents who raised them in such a strange world. They were honestly just doing the best they could. Their parenting handbook was written by superstition. It was written by questionable science. It was also written by a pure and unfiltered anxiety. They loved their children, but they showed it in ways that seem alien and cruel to us now. It was a world of good intentions and terrible results. You have survived this journey with us. You have survived the nursery gruel and the endless nursery rules. You have survived more household toxins than the periodic table. You braved the lead paint on the walls. You braved the teething syrups that could tranquilize a pony. You even survived the grim family portraits. They were grim enough to scare away nightmares. And if a child made it all the way to adulthood, what did they have? They had at least 3 important moral lessons. They had a permanent collection of mysterious rashes, and they had a deep and lifelong suspicion of all things cabbage. They were true survivors in every sense of the word. They were forged in a fire of discipline and discomfort. Let us be honest with ourselves. Victorian parenting might have been well-intentioned, but it was also bizarre and bonkers. It was occasionally borderline criminal by our modern standards. It was a system designed to produce miniature adults. It often succeeded by crushing the spirit of childhood. The cost of this character building was very high, yet somehow, through all the dubious medicine and layers of wool families stuck together, children grew up to be tough and creative. They were equipped with survival instincts that would impress a modern prepper. They learned to navigate a world of strict rules. They found joy in the smallest moments of freedom. Tonight, as you listen to the soft hum of a fan whisper a quiet thank you, thank your own ancestors who survived calamitous cod liver oil. They survived a childhood where fresh air sometimes meant dangling in a cage. They made it through so that you could be here. Their resilience is a part of your own story. History can be a brutal and ridiculous thing, but it is also proof that people are stubborn and hopeful. They are always inventing new ways to get through the day. They find ways to love and to endure, and they pass that strength on to the next generation. That is the true and lasting legacy of the past. So relax now and breathe easy. Let go of whatever small modern worries you carried with you to bed. Your concerns are valid, but they do not belong here in this quiet moment. Let the weight of the day drift away. There is only rest now, because right now there is no laudanum in your medicine cabinet. There is no arsenic hiding in your curtains, and nobody is insisting that you must finish your liver pudding. All of those strange anxieties belong to the past. They are just stories in the dark. They cannot reach you here. You are surrounded only by the comfort of the present. You are here with the simple luxury of safety. and you have the knowledge of the quietly heroic absurdity of those who came before. Their struggles are over, and now so is your day. Sleep well, and may all of your dreams be free of nannies with mustaches. May they be free of lead-based wallpaper. May you dream of gentle and peaceful things, or may you not dream at all. May you just find a deep and restorative rest. If our journey tonight helped you unwind, please like this video. Please subscribe to Medieval Nocturnes. It helps us continue to bring these stories from the past into the quiet of the night. We are grateful for your presence here. The story is over now. The house is quiet. The shadows are soft and friendly. There is nothing left to do. There is only the gentle pull of sleep. Allow it to take you. Good night.